Friday, October 21st, 1966, in Aberfan, a small coal mining village in South Wales, began just like thousands of other October days. The Taff Valley was shrouded in a thick, heavy mist, a constant companion in these parts. The air smelled of coal and dampness, and towering above the rooftops were the massive spoil heaps, man-made mountains of coal waste that had become an integral, almost natural part of the landscape over the decades. For the residents of Aberfan, the colliery was the source of life, and these tips were symbols of stability and employment. No one wanted to believe that Tip 7, which loomed directly above the Pantglas Junior School, had been slowly turning into a deadly trap for several days as torrential rains saturated its base. That morning, approximately 240 children hurried through their goodbyes to their parents and ran toward the school. It was a special day, the last Friday before the half-term holidays. The classrooms were filled with joyful excitement. The children were planning their week off, and the teachers were preparing a festive tea. At 9 a.m., the bell rang, and the pupils gathered in the main hall for the morning assembly. They sang the hymn, "All Things Bright and Beautiful," their clear voices echoing through the corridors of the old brick building. After the assembly, the children dispersed to their classrooms, opened their notebooks, and prepared for their first lesson. No one paid any mind to the strange rumbling coming from the top of the mountain, hidden in the fog. Everyone assumed it was just thunder or the sound of machinery working at the pit. This was the final moment of normal life for an entire generation of Aberfan. In the classrooms, teachers marked their registers, while children whispered secrets and shared holiday plans. The atmosphere was filled with that unique childhood serenity that only exists an hour before long-awaited freedom. We look at the photographs from those years, those smiling faces in school uniforms, and the heart wrenches with the realization that in just a few minutes, their world would vanish forever under a black wave. The Aberfan disaster hits hard precisely because of this contrast. The mundane bustle, the children's laughter, and the looming, absolutely avoidable catastrophe that could have been prevented if only someone had listened to the Earth's warning signs in time. At 9:15 a.m., the silence of the misty morning was shattered by a sound that survivors would later describe as the roar of a low-flying jet or a roll of endless thunder. At the top of the mountain, Tip 7 finally lost its stability. 150,000 tons of coal waste, which had turned into a semi-liquid slurry due to the rains, broke loose and surged down the slope. This was no ordinary landslide. It was a black avalanche, a viscous, heavy mass hurtling at speeds of over 20 miles per hour, sweeping away ancient trees, stone walls, and power lines in its path. The fog was so thick that people in the valley could not see the approaching death. They only heard its growing, all-consuming roar. The impact on Pantglas Junior School was devastating. A mass of mud over 30 feet high slammed into the back wall of the building, instantly breaching the brickwork. In the classrooms where lessons had just begun, the walls simply ceased to exist. The liquid slurry filled the rooms in seconds, rising to the ceilings and entombing the children at their desks. The pupils had no time even to comprehend what was happening. Many died instantly from the tremendous pressure and structural collapse. The massive wave of mud tore through the school and destroyed several neighboring houses before finally coming to a halt, turning the flourishing outskirts of the town into a lifeless black desert. In that minute, time in Aberfan stood still. The deafening roar was replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence, broken only occasionally by the sound of bursting pipes and settling debris. Those outside the impact zone froze in daze, staring at the place where the school had stood just a moment before. In its place now loomed a steaming mountain of black slime, from under which not a sound could be heard. It was a moment of absolute horror, the realization that nearly 300 people, most of them children, had been buried alive. This part of the story hits hard because of its ruthless suddenness. 1 second, a child was writing in a notebook, and the next, their world was swallowed by darkness forever. The first minutes after the catastrophe resembled scenes from a film about the end of the world. At the alarm signal, hundreds of men poured out of the Merthyr Vale colliery. They ran toward the school, still wearing their helmets, their faces masked in coal dust. They were joined by mothers who had just walked their children to the gates and old men who remembered the wars. The people had no heavy machinery, only shovels, buckets, and their own bare hands. They began to dig frantically, clawing at the sticky, heavy sludge that had the consistency of quicksand. The problem was that the slurry kept flowing. As soon as rescuers dug a hole, it would immediately refill with fresh black mass. The most piercing moment of the rescue operation was the periods of total silence. Every few minutes, a police officer would raise a hand or blow a whistle. In that instant, hundreds of people froze. The miners stopped digging, the crowds on the hillside stopped weeping, and even the birds seemed to fall silent. Everyone listened to the depths of the Black Mountain, hoping to catch even a faint groan, a cry, or a tap on a pipe. If a sound was heard, hundreds of hands began to work with triple the strength. This was how Jeff Edwards and several other children were saved, pulled from air pockets beneath the debris. But with every passing hour, those sounds became fewer and farther between. This was a battle not just against the elements, but against death itself. Miners, accustomed to the dangers underground, were now sobbing as they carried out small bodies covered in black slime. A temporary mortuary was set up in the local Bethel Chapel, where parents came for identification. These were the most harrowing cues in the history of Wales. This part of the story hits hard because of the incredible, almost superhuman solidarity. People dug until their hands were bloodied and their fingernails peeled away, refusing to believe that the school had become a mass grave. We see these images, chains of people passing buckets of mud, and realize that on that day in Aberfan, the highest form of human courage was revealed alongside the deepest grief a heart can endure. While Aberfan was drowning in grief, the rest of Britain began asking questions that quickly turned into a roar of fury. The tragedy was not a natural disaster. It was the result of criminal negligence. It emerged that the town's residents and the local council had spent years writing letters to the National Coal Board, NCB, warning that Tip 7 sat atop underground springs and was slowly sliding. The authorities' responses were cynical and chilling. Miners were hinted that if they rocked the boat, the colliery would simply be closed, leaving the town jobless. This gambling with children's lives for the sake of coal production targets became the ultimate shame of the industrial era. Lord Robbins, head of the NCB, didn't even go to Aberfan on the day of the disaster, attending a university ceremony instead, and later claimed that nothing could have been foreseen. A special place in this chapter is held by the story of Queen Elizabeth II. The world expected the monarch to arrive at the scene immediately to comfort her people. However, Elizabeth, following strict protocol and fearing her visit would distract rescuers, only arrived in Aberfan on the 8th day. By the time she stood among the ruins, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes, it was too late. The last of the children had already been buried. The Queen later admitted that this delayed decision was the greatest regret of her life. The images of a weeping queen among grief-stricken miners became a symbol that the scale of Aberfan was beyond any protocol or political game. But the real blow hits hard with the official inquiry. Despite the coal board's guilt being fully proven, not a single official was fired, fined, or prosecuted. Furthermore, the government committed an act of unheard-of cruelty. It forced the Disaster Relief Fund, money sent by ordinary people from around the world, to pay $150,000 to clear the remaining tips. The authorities literally reached into the pockets of grieving parents to fix their own mistakes. This point of the story is about the bitter realization that, for the state machine, the little people from the Welsh valleys were merely a statistical error. And it is this injustice that burns the hearts of survivors to this day. After the final funeral processions left the rain-soaked streets, Aberfan sank into a silence more terrifying than any roar. It became a village where time was split into before and after. The most unbearable reality was that an entire link had been ripped from the community's life. A generation of children aged 7 to 10 had been practically wiped from the face of the earth. Schoolyards no longer rang with laughter, and in homes, Christmas presents bought in advance sat untouched. The psychological trauma was so deep that many surviving children suffered for decades from survivor's guilt, unable to understand why they lived while their friends at the next desk perished. Today, a memorial garden stands on the site of Pantglas Junior School. Its walls trace the footprints of the former classrooms, where blackboards and desks once stood, flowers now bloom, and peace reigns. But the true heart of the tragedy lies higher up, at Bryntaff Cemetery. There, on the hillside, long rows of white pearlstone arches stretch across the grass. Under each one is the name of a child whose life ended on that misty October morning. This cemetery has become a place of pilgrimage for all of Britain, an eternal reminder of where indifference leads. It was only in 1997, 30 years later, that the British government officially returned the money taken from the disaster fund, finally acknowledging the act as shameful. The story of Aberfan hits hard because it forced the world to change its very attitude toward industrial safety and corporate responsibility to the people. Because of this sacrifice, strict laws were passed that protect thousands of other towns today. But for the residents of the Taff Valley, this is cold comfort. We look at modern footage of Aberfan, now a green, peaceful corner of Wales, and realize that beneath this greenery lies a wound that never heals. The eternal lesson of Aberfan is that no ton of coal, no percentage of profit is worth the life of a single child. As we conclude this story, we remember the hymn, "All things bright and beautiful," that the children sang before the disaster, and realize the world became a little darker on the day the mountains swallowed the light of Aberfan.